Now, if anyone listening to this has ever struggled with self-doubt, particularly in the workplace, just feeling like you don't belong in a situation, it's often referred to as something called Imposter Syndrome. And now the Virgin founder, Sir Richard Branson, has said himself that he still has to pinch himself when he's faced with some of the world's most famous and influential people. He's been speaking to the BBC for this new documentary about Imposter Syndrome, which is available on the iPlayer, and reflects on the self-doubt that he's experienced right through his career. He told our reporter, Rob Adcock, how much stemmed from his struggles at school because of dyslexia.
It was extremely difficult. I mean, the school reports basically had teachers despairing. In those days, if you didn't get the right exam results, you were beaten, and I was beaten a lot. The way I dealt with it was to try to put my mind into things that I was interested in.
We've spoken about imposter syndrome. You've met so many amazing people. Have you ever felt it in a social setting where you thought to yourself, how on earth have I got here?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate to have met some incredible people. The Obamas, for instance, we were lucky enough to spend time with them when they stepped down from the White House. Delightful, charming people. And obviously when you're sitting having conversations with people like that, if you reflect back to your childhood and the times at school when you were looking at the blackboard and everything was a mumbo-jumbo and you had to come home to your parents going through your school exam report, you have to pinch yourself a bit.
Really interesting to hear Sir Richard Branson speak like that. And let's speak to Dr. Kate Atkin, who's a speaker and facilitator who's spent 10 years researching imposter syndrome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Kate, I think there'll be a lot of people who'll hear this morning, and they will perhaps have felt that self-doubt. They might, in a way, be able to relate to what Sir Richard Branson is saying here, maybe not quite with the Obamas, but in their own workplace. But they'll not know that it's imposter syndrome. That's what it is. I think, explain first of all what we mean by this. What exactly is imposter syndrome?
That is a really good question and a great place to start, because syndrome, I think, is a misnomer because it has a connotation to a mental health condition, whereas in actual fact, the early academics called it phenomenon. Being like Branson said, in certain places with certain people at certain points in time, that's when the self-doubt occurs. Should I be here? Do I deserve to be here? And often it does come from some childhood messages, but it can also be society that sort of says, actually, do you deserve to be in that position, that place? And it's one of those things where it differs from normal self-doubt, where I don't know if I can do this. The key thing is these imposter feelings actually come despite the external evidence that you do deserve to be there, that you are successful, that you can do it.
And am I right in saying that very often, and perhaps I'm wrong on this, very often this applies more to women than to men?
That's really another interesting question, because technically, in academic research, it doesn't indicate a difference, that men don't experience it or women experience it far more than men. In actual fact, it seems to be from the research evidence that it's a roughly 50-50 split. But I think what anecdotally I find is men tend to think, well, if I'm experiencing this, so does everybody else. And so they perhaps deal with it differently. They push themselves through, whereas maybe women hold themselves back more. And that's only a maybe. It's not actually, again, a fully researched thing, because some of the men that I spoke to were very definitely also holding themselves back. And by that, I mean not applying for a job, not going for that promotion, not speaking up in meetings at work when you have an idea, not sharing those thoughts and creativity. And I think organisations then are missing out on what individuals have to offer. So I don't think it's a gendered issue.
That's really interesting, because as you say, it's very much anecdotal when we have these conversations about imposter syndrome, and that often is what comes up. And also just how it starts. People have their own ideas of where it comes from. So Richard Branson there reflecting on the fact it was maybe from, his childhood and suffering with dyslexia. And often I don't think there really is a reason that we can explain.
There are a number of, again, research indicates, go back to the research, it indicates there are a number of causes, and childhood experiences and childhood messages are one of those causes. So for myself, I can resonate with Branson having the shy label. He talks in the documentary about being a shy kid, and I got that particular label. I also failed the 11 plus exam, which he took in those days, that said, if you're academically clever, you go off to the grammar school, which I failed, so didn't deem myself academic. And so studied for my doctorate in my late 50s. And it's another interesting point. Sometimes early childhood labels, sometimes it's family messages, societal messages, or even the organisation that you're working in. Can you see somebody like you around that has got to the next level up? Do you think that you then belong in that organisation at that next level up?
And then how do you tackle it? Because it's not just as simple as somebody being able to say, look, you're completely qualified for this role. You've got the experience. Oh, yeah, look at that. I do. It's very hard to change someone's mind whenever that's the way they think.
It is extremely difficult. And one of the things I think we really need to stop doing is tell people how amazing they are. Stop telling people all these brilliant, successful things and how much faith you've got in them. And of course they can go for that job. It's actually helping them understand and unpick the evidence for themselves, because the imposter feelings are there and differ from normal self-doubt because you have got that external evidence of success. But you've dismissed it. You've put it down to luck, or you've put it down to hard work. Whereas actually we should stop comparing ourselves to others and start to look at comparing ourselves to ourselves, for instance. You know, how much have I learned in the last week, the last month, the last year? And recognise our knowledge, skills and abilities grow. Look at internalising that external feedback. If you start to dismiss what everybody else is telling you and think, oh, no, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, then actually you're potentially being arrogant by trying to stay humble. It's a really interesting dynamic in the mind. But dismissing that external feedback means that you're believing yourself over and above everybody else. And that, to me, could be arrogance, whereas if you've got imposter feelings, you really are trying hard not to be arrogant.
That's it, exactly, or to be seen in that way. And I think it's such a leveller. People can often be quite amazed as to who experiences this. You know, when you hear Sir Richard Branson talking there, I imagine people at many levels of life have experienced this in some way.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of the pleasures that I have as a speaker and facilitator to open up the conversations with people in workshops or keynote talks to help others understand that it's not them. They are not alone. I've certainly been experiencing this since my teenage years, but didn't have the label and the language for it, which we've got now. And I think that label and language can really help you understand it and go, okay, it's not just me, it's a thing. And now I've got some strategies and I can deal with it.
It's fascinating. I'd be really keen to hear from anyone listening to this, if this is something that you can relate to, if you have experienced, if you've been aware that you've dealt with this in the past. 85058. The Imposter Syndrome, the documentary, is available right now on BBC iPlayer. A really interesting watch. Dr. Kate Atkin, thank you very much.
My pleasure.